So I've owned and used a lot of different cameras over this past few years, way too many. You know, I've also actually worked at a camera store, so I've gotten to try all the latest and greatest stuff, as well as some of the older things, and really get a sense of what I think would work really well if I was to pick up a kit at any given price point. But what I'm gonna focus on is the cameras that I've actually used, things I've used for paid projects, things I've used for personal projects, and the things that I would probably buy again if I was in that scenario. So let's start by defining our parameters here. We're talking about portrait photography, environmental portraits, traditional portraits, maybe a little bit of like street portraits, that kind of thing. Ideally, as we go up in price, a few different lenses are going to be important. Bonus points for dual memory cards, video functionality, dynamic range, all that stuff that kind of adds on to make things even better. And another really important point that we're going to factor in is resale value, because this is something that is just not talked about enough. If you're buying a camera right now in any of these price ranges, my assumption is that you're probably either fairly new, or this is a hobby, or you're just getting started into this professionally. You don't want to break the bank, but it also probably means that in the future, you're going to want a better camera. That means you're going to want to resell this camera later on. So I wanted to keep that in mind when I was picking options for you here. Some of these I don't think are going to have great resale value, so I will bring up the ones that I think you might want to steer towards or away from because of that. Okay, let's talk about the $500 budget. This is a kind of tricky one, because if you want to get a good camera and a good lens for $500, you're really limited. I think a lot of times people will say like, don't bother, just shoot with your iPhone. Fine, sure, if that's what you want to do. But if you want to have a real camera, something that you can put your hands on, that you can use to learn, I think this right here, this exact setup is what you're gonna want. This is the Canon 5D Mark II. Been around forever, came out in 2008. And it is an absolutely beautiful camera. This was a game changer when it came out. You can watch a million different videos about why this was such an important camera, but the thing to keep in mind is that it takes stunning portraits. It has a beautiful sensor that renders skin tones really lovely. It's available for so cheap. On here I have the 50mm f1.8 from Canon. This combo you should be able to pick up for about $500, maybe a little bit less. The batteries last forever. You're probably gonna get 1 or 2 batteries with it. And a lot of times when you're buying this, people will just throw in the compact flash for you because it's kind of a memory card nobody really uses anymore. But that is the one con about this camera. Well, the 2 cons, I guess. You're looking at using these guys here, compact flash cards. The problem with these is that they're pretty expensive to buy and they're not the fastest things in the world. Some people have reported that they have issues with them breaking because the pins in them are super sensitive. I've never had any issues with that, but I would say that's a con about this camera, is that it is a little bit more expensive when you're factoring that in. Plus side being people just tend to give these to you. It also doesn't have a dual memory card slot, so you're not able to back up your images, which could be a problem for you if that's something you care about. Overall, I think if you're just getting into portraiture and your budget's $500, you literally cannot do better than this. Now, this is 500 Canadian dollars. If you're in the US, you actually might be able to pick this up with the f1.4 50mm lens, which is an awesome combination too. I don't love that lens to use. It kind of sucks actually. Like, it's pretty slow to focus, kind of racks focus a lot. It feels kind of cheap, even though it's a more expensive lens, but the image quality on it is really nice. So if you want to get that creamier background, you want to get that fall off, or you want better low light capabilities, that lens you probably could pick up with this camera for under $500 US. Okay, our next budget, we're doubling up to $1,000. What would I recommend for this? I would either look into getting one camera with a couple different lenses, or I would look at bumping up the camera body to something with maybe a higher megapixel count so you can get more detail, you can punch in more, that kind of thing. So my recommendation of the 5D Mark II and the 50mm lens stands. I would actually keep that combination, and I think you could actually add on the 100mm f2.8 macro. That is an awesome lens. It is, again, kind of slow, not the best focusing, all that kind of stuff, but it's super crisp and it creates beautiful portraits. I really like that combination. However, I would say you do want to really think about whether or not you want to stick with this body and go with 2 lenses, or if you want to bump up to a body that's going to give you, you know, a little bit more megapixel count. The other option I think would be awesome would be the Nikon D800 and the 50mm 1.4G. Some of my favorite just environmental street portraits that I got were with this combination. I think it's beautiful, and I think you can get a lot out of this camera for the price point. There are some downsides to this combo that I think are pretty big, and I would probably hesitate because of them. The first downside I would say is that the files were kind of hard to work with. My computer really struggled at the time. Now, this was on a MacBook Air. It was an M1. It didn't have a lot of RAM to it. It was basically the base model M1 MacBook Air. I just found that those 36 megapixel files were pretty tough on my computer. It would definitely slow down. I couldn't switch between them quickly. I couldn't do a heavy edit on them without my computer really slowing down. The other major issue, and this is way bigger than anything else, is that it is so hard to resell old Nikon gear. I would almost guarantee you that if you buy this combination and then you go to sell it later on, you will lose money, or you just might not be able to sell it at all. Having said that, you don't really have any reason to move away from this camera for a very long time. If you want to shoot portraits on this camera, you could keep this body and just keep investing in better and better lenses. Okay, one other combination that you might think about would be the Sony a6100 and the Zeiss 55mm f1.7. I don't know if you'll be able to find this for under $1,000. I think in the States you probably could. Canada might be a little bit tougher. You might be bumping up to that like $1,100-$1,200 mark, to be honest. But if you can find that combo, it is a really good option. I personally hate the a6100 because I think its ergonomics are just dog shit, and I really don't like using that EVF or the LCD. It just feels cheap. But the 55mm lens is absolutely one of my favorite lenses I've ever used. I would almost go back to Sony to use that lens. Now, again, if you're in US dollars, you could basically add an extra lens to almost all of these. Y'all have it good out there if you want to spend $1,000, but it doesn't get us quite as far here in Canada. Okay, $2,000. This is an interesting price point, but for me, there's one combo that kind of rules, and this is one that I think you could definitely pick up for $2,000, and you would get literally everything you need. So if I was looking to get an amazing setup to shoot portraits, and I had $2,000 to spend, I would get the Fujifilm X-T3 with the 23, 35, and 50mm f2 lenses. The reason I would choose this is because the X-T3 is far and away one of the best cameras you can get for this price point. You've got beautiful 4K video, it's got dual card slots, it takes stunning images, it's a joy to use. You get to use the dials on top, which actually helps you to learn more about photography. And the other nice thing about the dials on top is that when the camera's off, you can have everything set up the way you want it, so the second you turn on the camera, you can take that photo. Having that ability to set your functions is just very, very helpful. The 23, 35, and 50mm f2 are beautiful lenses. They're weather sealed. They're very crisp. I love that combination, and I think it is definitely the best choice. There's literally nothing else I would recommend. If you really wanted to go with a zoom, then I would say you could look at something like the Tamron 17-70, which is what I'm filming on right now, or you could look at the Sigma 18-50 f2.8. That one's a little bit smaller, and it would go really nicely with the X-T3. So that's my thoughts on cameras that I've enjoyed using and that I think would actually work really well for that kind of portraiture. I'd love to hear what cameras you think. You know, I've shot with pretty much every brand except for Pentax. I've never shot with a Pentax camera, and I don't see it happening anytime soon unless they want to give me a camera. I do think there's a great option from any brand that you want to go with. You just kind of have to do your research. These are the ones I've really loved. Other thing that's important to keep in mind here is that with every camera, you have to think of the ecosystem around it. So you're going to need to get more batteries, memory cards, maybe you need a cage because you're going to do filming. You want to make sure you're budgeting for those things on top of the camera itself. I'm somebody who's happy to buy off of other photographers, and so that means that I can get a better deal, but I also run the risk of maybe that camera's not working. So you have to decide for yourself if that's something you're cool with. Anyways, I hope that's helpful. I hope that's something interesting for you to think about. Let me know if you've tried any of the combinations, but I'd love to hear about what you're shooting on right now, because I always love to try new gear, and I'm sure there's stuff out there that I haven't even heard of that would be great. Thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. It's fun to be able to start making these videos, and I hope more and more people see these because I want to get more of a community going, and this is what I want to do. So thank you so much for joining. Peace. Pachink. It's not turned on. Good job, Cotton. You made it through.